أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فلما دخلوا عليه قالوا يا أيها العزيز مسنا وأهلنا الضر وجئنا ببضاعة مزجاة فأوف لنا الكيل وتصدق علينا إن الله يجزي المتصدقين قال هل علمتم ما فعلتم بيوسف وأخيه إذ أنتم جاهلون رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Once again, everyone, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. So today, before I start discussing with you the subject matter of ayah number 88 and 89 of Surah Yusuf, I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about an outstanding question from the previous ayat. A student of mine, Naeem, actually sent me that question, and it's, in fact, Sheikh Suhaib and I had discussed it, but I didn't bring it up in the lecture, so I think it's a good idea to bring it up. You notice in the previous ayat when, Yaqub alayhi salam actually told his sons, Jacob tells his sons to go look for Yusuf and his brother, right? So I did talk to you last time about why he mentioned Yusuf first. But it's interesting that 3 sons are missing, and he says, look for Yusuf and his brother. So 2 questions arise. Why not mention the 3rd son? And the other, you don't have to look for Binyamin, you know where he is. Like the look for issue is something related to Yusuf, but it's not related to Binyamin, right? So why mention look for or find clues pertaining to Yusuf and his brother? A few answers to that. One, some suggest that Yaqub alayhi salam already kind of felt a hint that these matters are connected to each other, and somehow these will bring about Yusuf and his brother together. So looking for Binyamin will actually lead to looking for Yusuf. So even though you're looking for or finding out about what happened with Binyamin, you'll end up finding out what happened with Yusuf, perhaps. But what seems more plausible is that look for, seek out Yusuf and seek out your brother. One, that the two have been parallel together to suggest you need to have the same consciousness. Like you feel guilty right now that Binyamin is left there and you should be concerned. Your concern for Yusuf should have been no different. Like you should have had the same attitude towards both of these. So they've been coupled together. The third one is not missing. He stayed back in Egypt on his own. And his whereabouts probably aren't a mystery. So because he sent them off. So he probably told them where he is. So he's not the one that's being searched for. Plus, they don't have to be told search for your other brother too, because they're the usba. They're the ones that call themselves a gang, an unbroken gang, right? So you don't have to tell them the obvious. You don't have to tell them look for the one that you get along with, because that's going to happen anyway. You're going to reunite with him anyway. And this is the Quran's way in many places of not stating the obvious. Right? So it's kind of side note, but an important side note. A lot of times we assume that the Quran is going to spell everything out, or the religion will spell everything out. No, it will spell out the things that are not obvious. And the things that are obvious, Allah expects us to use our intellect. That's just how this religion is. That's why you don't find in the Quran how to take care of a baby. You don't find guidance in the Quran on how to do that. Why not? Because that's something Allah endowed human beings the intellect to do. How to feed a child. There's no guidance for that. And if you consider, for example, the marriage and divorce subject matter in the Quran, when Allah talks about divorce, He talks about it exhaustively, because actually when divorce happens, people don't know what to do. And a lot of wrong happens. So Allah talks about that. But when he doesn't talk about marriage much. He doesn't talk about, here's what you do in a marriage. Basic rights, responsibilities, yes. But the day-to-day and how to carry about yourself, no, there's general principles that apply to any situation. Fairness, honesty, transparency, reliance, trust, fulfillment of responsibility. These are things that belong in any relationship, not just the marital one. The nature of them is different, but it's not spelled out so specifically because it's obvious. And even in the storytelling in the Quran, you'll find that the obvious isn't mentioned. And if something is apparently obvious and it is mentioned, then something is being highlighted about it that's not so obvious. So this is actually the kind of the sensitivity and the sophistication with which we need to look at the text of the Quran. Now, The other interesting thing about, look for Yusuf and his brother is look for Yusuf because he's lost, right? He's lost in the possession of strangers. We don't know what came of him. But even if you know that Benjamin is in prison, or he's been incarcerated, or he's being detained, that doesn't mean you know how he's doing. That doesn't mean you know the cell he's in, or who his the cellmates are, or if he's being beaten or tortured. You know nothing, right? Even nowadays, if somebody's arrested or detained, right, and the family wants to know, well, he's in this state prison, or he's being held in this penitentiary, or he's being held in this government building, or whatever, this detainment center. You still want to know what's going on. How are they doing? Are they eating well? Are they sick? How are they being treated? How's their mental health? Can I talk to them? Can I not find out if they're okay? Just because you know they're there doesn't mean you have access to them and you actually know that they're okay. So tahassus is actually also investigate what actually came of him. Okay, fine, he's been held back, but did he become a slave? Is he being used for hard labor? What's his situation now? Go find that out too. So that's why tahassasu min Yusufa wa akhihi, and not mentioning the brother, because that's all too obvious. Okay. Now coming to the ayah of the day, pretty much the first thing to notice, they didn't respond when he said, when in the previous ayah, when Yaqub alayhi salam told them, don't lose hope in the mercy of Allah. La tayasu min rawhillah. They didn't respond to him. They didn't argue back or fight back. It's kind of like they gave into that a little bit, which was a silent form of confession. They actually admitted that they have done some wrong, and they're not going to get annoyed by the mention of Yusuf. They kind of surrendered. Now, this could mean that they internalized some guilt and they're actually not going to fight back, or they gave up on that and said, you know what, I'm not even going to bother having this conversation. Fine. And they left, right? The next scene we find in the Quran, fast forward, they left Canaan, they traveled all across Egypt, they're in front of Yusuf again. So in the next ayah, the ayah we're reading today, they're in the palace, they're in the court, Yusuf is in front of them, Binyamin and he have already figured things out, and they're okay. They don't see that, they only see Yusuf alayhi salam, and they're going to speak their piece. Now, what's the expectation? The expectation is, what did father send them to do? Idhabu, go. فَتَحَسَّسُوا مِنْ يُوسُفَ وَأَخِيهِ. Go, then look out for any clues you can find regarding Yusuf and his brother. Wasn't that the case? And don't lose hope in Allah's mercy. Now, the next ayat, you would expect, because they heard father say this, if they are obedient sons and concerned sons, that they would come back and say, Governor, we know that we tried to get our brother back and put one in his place, but you refused to let us do that, and we lost all hope that you'll let us do that. But please, our father is begging you. And some narrations even, it's not authenticated, but some narrations even mention that there was a letter sent by Jacob to his sons to give to Joseph. Yaqub sent a letter in the hands of his brothers to give to Yusuf alayhi salam. Again, not very authenticated, and I'm pretty doubtful of this narration because of the content of it. And here's the content of it. The letter basically says, I'm his father, I'm an old man, I love him, please give him back to me. And if you don't, then your seventh generation is going to be, you're going to experience death or a curse. Like, there's a curse in it if you don't comply with my request. Prophets don't speak like that. And prophets don't issue threats along with du'as, right? That's, we do that, but prophets, this is not the way of prophets. And it's unbecoming of the character depicted of Yaqub alayhi salam in the Quran. Right? So he sends them off to go and get their brothers. Here's what they're going to say now. They're in front. This is the scene. They're in front of Joseph. Yusuf knows that they're his brothers. They don't know. And now they are in this state. And what are they going to say? They're going to say, could you please give us our brother? No, they don't say that. Did they look for Yusuf alayhi salam at all? Doesn't seem that way. What does it seem to be? فَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ. Then finally, when they entered into his company, قَالُوا, they said, أَيَّا أَيُّهَا الْعَزِيزُ, minister. And ayyuha is, it's a nida, and it's also got a kind of ta'ziz in it. You can argue, meaning it's got a kind of dignifying or takreem in it. Noble minister. So they're addressing Yusuf alayhi salam as minister. Now, it's interesting that there's going to be a duality in the words, like a sense of irony in the words. When they call him Aziz, which means literally minister or governor, in the etymology sense, in the origin of the Arabic language, it means someone who has power that cannot be questioned. Someone who can take a decision and cannot be overrun, right? Which is literally what they had over him. They were acting with him in a state of izzah, doing whatever they wanted with him as they tossed him in a well. They had a multiple choice, whichever abuse they want to carry out. So they were the Aziz, and he was in a state of dhul. He was in a state of humility and powerlessness. Now, as the story's wrapping up, they're coming to the one that was powerless when they were powerful, and they're coming powerless in front of him and saying, Ayyuhal Aziz, the one that has the power and might and has the discretion to take whatever decision he wants without anybody questioning the consequences of his decisions. Al Aziz. See the irony? Right? And then they don't even know the incredible contrast they're painting with their own mouths, right? So they say, Massana wa ahlana durru. Harm that comes from poverty, harm that comes from difficult circumstances is called dur in Arabic. So dar and dur in Arabic are actually one of the words for harm, and it's associated with poverty, bankruptcy, famine, war, etc. When you have a situation in which difficulty comes to you because of your surroundings, that's called dur. So they say, dur, this great difficulty because of the circumstances, has touched us and our family. That's the first thing they say. Difficulty has touched us and our family. Now we'll tie this all together, but let's just take note of the irony as we go along, right? So it's interesting you say that our family has been afflicted by difficulty. You're the first ones who brought difficulty to your family. And the one you're saying this to, you created harmful circumstances for him. And now you're coming to him and saying that the difficult circumstances have touched us, they've gotten a hold of us, we're surrounded by them in a sense. Massa actually means to be touched. It's a figure of speech in Arabic expression for when someone is overrun by something. When someone's overwhelmed by a situation, they're touched by it. They're touched by it. You could probably, not the literal, but the literary equivalent would be, we're flooded with problems. When you're flooded and the water surrounds you, right? You're drowning in it. We're drowning in this difficulty. It's interesting that language is used because that's literally what they did to Yusuf alayhi salam. And they drowned their father in tears, didn't they? They drowned him in a well. They drowned their father in tears. But now they're the ones coming and saying, we and our family, great affliction has hurt us, has touched us. Now, what could that mean? It could mean times have gotten tougher, minister. We know we took food from you, but the food's run out too. And our families are starving. The situation hasn't gotten any better. The drought hasn't gotten any better. Famine is worse. Crime is worse. Security is worse. Our family's worse off than even last year or the last time we came to see you. Okay. وَجِئْنَا بِبِضَاعَةٍ مُزْجَاةٍ. So the first thing was we're having a lot of problems, right? Second thing, وَجِئْنَا بِبِضَاعَةٍ مُزْجَاةٍ. And we've brought goods, we've brought sellable goods that are muzjat. Now, asja yusji is actually in Arabic, tasjia is used for a cow when its calf, the baby cow, the calf, is now moving and the cow wants it to move. So it uses its head to nudge it a little bit and move it along. That's called tasjia. And when the winds gently nudge the clouds, Allah says, yusji sahaban. So he uses that when the winds or tujdi, when the winds push the clouds gently. So when you gently push something or move it along, right? That's actually the original meaning of tasjia or isja. They use this word musjat, which is an ism maf'ul for bida'a, for the sellable goods, as if to say the supplies because they used to bring whatever they have from home to sell. But this time, the goods that we've brought to sell you are the kinds of goods when people see them, they gently push them away and say, no, thanks. Like the cow pushes the baby and the winds push the clouds. It's like when the salesperson wants to sell you this, look at this banana, and you could see the worm coming out of it on the side. You're like, no, thanks. And you kindly, gently, without embarrassing the seller, move along and don't buy what they're selling. We've brought goods that are hard to sell and people just pass along. They don't want to buy that stuff. So we know it's no good stuff. Because nobody had cash, right? They had either silver before. You could see that it was small amounts of things like currency, like silver, because it was placed in their bags and they didn't even know it was in their bags. Had they brought wood to sell or, copper or some other metals or materials, then they would have noticed bags full. But now it seems they've run out of money and they've brought actual things to barter. And the things they found around the house aren't things that people want to buy. So we brought these things. They may look like trash to you, but that's all we got now. And he says, they say, فَأَوْفِي لَنَا الْكَيْلَ. Then thus could you fill the scale for us? What that means is we used to come with a certain amount of silver or coin, and you used to fill one camel or one donkey full of meal, right? Rice or grain or whatever, right? Now we've brought this like ripped pillow, and we brought this old piece of wood, and we got this, this stick over here or whatever. We got this stuff, this muzjat stuff that nobody wants to buy, but could you still fill the camel anyway? فَأَوْفِي لَنَا الْكَيْلَ. So they're in a pretty pathetic state now, right? They're a pretty desperate economic state, and they're broken. And then, could you fill this load for us? And then they add, وَتَصَدَّقْ عَلَيْنَا. And could you give us some charity on top of that too? Could you give us a sadaqah on top of that? I'll talk to you about tasadduq a little bit later, but let's talk about the irony again. These three things I've said so far. So we brought unsellable goods, pathetic goods. Number two, could you give us the full load anyway, even though we brought pathetic goods? And then could you also give us charity? Let's look at the irony in these statements. What they don't realize they may be coming out of their mouths, and the epicness of it is not something they're aware of, they're conscious of. First and foremost, long time ago, this child was taken out of the well and turned into bida'a. This is a repetition of the same word. وَأَسَرُّوهُ بِضَاعَةً. They hid him. Remember those people that found him in the well? They hid him as sellable goods. They hid him as what? Sellable goods. And they didn't value him. They valued him less than sellable goods to toss him away. Actually, the biblical version is they sold him off for cheap. That's the biblical version. In the Quran's version, they left him in the well. In the Bible version, Imam Razi even tries to reconcile the two and says, no, they left him in the well, and then they were about to, and they saw a caravan coming, and they said, might as well make some money out of it, and they sold him for nothing. And so now you come to your brother who you sold, or who ended up being sold like worthless goods, who ended up being sold like that, and you come to him with bida'ah. The irony of it. You come to him with goods and say, can you just buy this from us? And then they say, Awfi lana al-kayl. Awfi means fulfill the scale. And this is a figure of speech also. Awful kayl idha kiltum. Fulfill the scale. In the Quran, Allah says, whenever you make the scale, fulfill the scale. It's a umbrella expression for being fair. Right? So when you fulfill the scale, that doesn't just mean a pound of weight here and a pound of rice here, or a kilo of grain here and a kilo of weight here. And so there's fulfill the scale. But it also means if you're being paid, do the hours. If you have a contract, fulfill the contract. It's a full-on expression for justice. Give us exactly what we deserve. Which is ironic that they're saying, could you give us exactly what we deserve? Could you give us in full what we deserve? Or what we should get? Give us what we need. Lay it on us. Don't hold back. Give it all. Then they added, remember the thing I said, وَتَصَدَّقْ عَلَيْنَا, give us charity, right? Tasaddaq, you've heard the word sadaqah a million times, right? Sadaqah means charity. Sadaqah comes actually from the word sidq, which is commonly understood to mean truth. One of the Arabic words for truth, and it's the antonym of kadhib or kidhb, to lie. But sidq is actually originally sadq, and it was used for a straight sword, rumh, sulb, or a straight spear. A spear that's perfect, and a spear that won't break, like a hard spear. Because what's a good quality of a spear? Its straightness and its toughness, right? When a spear is perfect and it's unbreakable, they call it sadq. And when a sword is like that, they call it sadq. And then they say sadaq al-wahshi. They use the same verb for wild animals when they charge straight towards their prey and they don't veer. They don't even look left and right. This is sadaq al-wahshi. Then they say sadaq al-nadhar. When someone looks straight at you and doesn't deviate their eyes, and their eyes don't deviate here and there, that's called sadaq al-nadhar. They say sadaq al-liqa when the person confronts their enemy without dodging at all. Like they're just on the offensive and they don't hold back, and they're not even moving to the side for defense. They're just on the attack. That's sadqul liqa. They say this. The word sidq was used in Arabic poetry, pre-Islam, and other references as a synonym, as an alternative for power and for intensity. Now, think about that. Straight, tough, unbreakable, powerful, on the attack is the same word the Arabs use for truth. That's the word they use for truth. So, what is truth by definition of the ancient Arabs? Offensive. It's straight, it cuts, it's used to attack. This is why Allah says, "Ja al-haqq wa zahaqa al-batil." The truth came and the falsehood dissipated. Allah literally describes in one ayah, because there's imagery in the Quran, He describes نَقْذِفُ الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ فَيَدْمَغُهُ. We hurl the spear of truth against falsehood and it bashes its skull in. Like it's the imagery of an enemy graphically being killed by a spear, and that's Allah describing the clash between truth and falsehood, right? Now it's interesting that this is the word for truth, and by the way, bardun sadiq, they say bardun sadiq for a truly cold winter. This is what winter really is, like the most intense winter, they call it bardun sadiq in ancient Arabic. Thawbu sidq is actually a garment that has all the right qualities. A person who's sidq has the best qualities. And what's the best of all the best qualities? They're straight, truthful, and honest. Yusuf alayhi salam has been called a siddiq previously. The inmate came back and wanted to recover him from the prison to get the dream to be interpreted and said, Ayyuha siddiq. Remember that? Now, what that meant is a sincere, genuine friend, but it also means someone who commits to the truth no matter what. No matter how hard it is to tell the truth, they'll tell the truth. No matter whose feelings will get hurt, no matter what kind of trouble they'll get in, they will tell the truth. They won't bend from the truth. They won't consider the political ramifications, the social ramifications of telling the truth. They'll just tell it like it is, and that's it. That's the Siddiq. Related to it is the word sadaqah. And it's used actually to, some try to make a correlation. It may not be a correlation, but to give sadaqah is actually to give something very sincere. Meaning if charity isn't being given for sincere reasons, it's actually not even considered sadaqah. But it's interesting that truthfulness and charity share the same spelling, the same letter origin. So when they say tasaddaq alayna, give us charity, give us sadaqah, it shares a root with, now tell us the whole truth. You can reveal the truth to us now. So there's a duality in that statement, interestingly, embedded, not directly, but very implicitly. So everything they're saying is a double-edged sword. One, they're trying to make a request. Two, is pointing back at them. So what tasaddaq alayna. And then they say, Inna Allaha yajzil mutasaddiqeen. Certainly Allah, He compensates, He rewards those who give charity. You weren't very charitable. You couldn't even let your brother breathe. Now you're going to talk about how Allah gives charity? Now there's a first problem that Imam Razi had with trying to understand this ayah. There seems to be a break. In the previous ayah, the father said, look for Yusuf and his brother, right? They come to Yusuf and say, we're looking for Yusuf and our brother? No, they say, we're starving. We didn't bring much, but this is what we got. Could you give us, did the brother come up? No. So this led Mufassirun to question, how come they didn't follow dad's instructions? There are different answers to that. One answer is, well, they probably did. It's obvious that they did that, but they were desperate also. So the Quran didn't mention it, but they must have done that. They must have looked for him, and then they were also desperate, and they, asked for this food and this charity and this assistance, this economic assistance. Another explanation is, like Imam Razi suggests, they were testing the waters. Basically, they were going to come to Yusuf and say, we're starving and our family's just in such difficulty. This is all we have left. Could you please give us a full load, even though we have no worth sellable goods, but still give us the full load of food for our families to survive, and be charitable on top of that for us? Could you give us charity on top of that? And if we see that he's being charitable, he's in a good mood, maybe we can slip in the request for Binyamin also. Well, let's just see how he responds first. So some say that they weren't being genuine in this demonstration. They were just kind of gauging where they stand with Yusuf alayhi salam. My personal reading doesn't afford them as much credit. Allahu Ta'ala alam. These are all possibilities. My reading of it is as follows, and you are absolutely not obligated to follow my reading of this, but I have shared that possibility, and this possibility has been mentioned in tafsir under waqila. So it has been said. So I floated this opinion to Sheikh Suhaib, and I was like, let's see if we find this in tradition. And Imam Al-Alusi rahimahullah actually mentioned exactly what I'm going to say to you now, but it said under not this person said, it said it has been said. So someone in history that I don't know shares this this thought process. I have the shared opinion with them, and may Allah reward them, and hopefully they're a normal person and I can meet them and we can talk about, hey man, I had the same opinion. And they're going to be like, you copied me, right? No, I read it first. That's how I play it out in my head. Anyway, so what is that opinion? Well, that opinion is as follows. Dad says, go look for Yusuf. And here's what they do. You know those roll of the eyes? Some of your kids give you the roll of the eyes. They roll them so hard they could fall off their socket and roll off the ground like marbles. The roll of the eyes means like, you know, what's that roll of the eyes? What does it mean? Here we go again. Oh, there he goes. It's one of those Yusuf lectures again. Yeah, inshallah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Look for you. Yeah, we will. Man, didn't we explain to him that Binyamin has been taken by the governor? Didn't we tell him, we begged him to let him go and he's not letting him go? Doesn't he understand that it's impossible? And he's going to give us a whole lecture about don't lose hope and go look for... Yes, Dad, of course. Yes, that's why we're going. Listen, we got to feed our families. Let's just go. If we got lucky, but come on, let's just not argue with him anymore. He's not worth the argument. In other words, they dismissed what Father said. And the only real concern, like the first trip, was what? Feeding themselves. So they go with whatever they can get. And when they present themselves before Yusuf, they don't make a case for their brother. The only case they make is what? Food. And Yusuf alayhi salam is sitting in front of them, listening to this display. And he says, he thinks to himself, perhaps, so many years ago, you abandoned me without a second thought. Right? And now you come back, and the word Binyamin doesn't even come out of your mouth. The only thing you ever said about Binyamin is, he's probably is a thief. And you asked me to give him to you. I said no. And that was it. You gave up on him. Now your hopes lie with food? He's done with? You don't want to bring that up again? So Yusuf alayhi salam is experiencing two things. As he's listening to this, first of all, I can't believe you're not even concerned about anything else. That's one observation. Another observation Yusuf alayhi salam is making as he's listening to them is, I'm pretty sure Father didn't send you here to make this case. I'm pretty sure Father sent you with some other instruction. There's no way, because he now knows, he remembers Dad from back in the day, and he has a more updated account of Dad from Binyamin. So he knows Father wouldn't have sent us for just food. There's no way. You're ignoring what Father said. You're ignoring it. And on top of all of that, now he sees those same brothers that were bullies, that were powerful, that were so strong, and who can touch us? In akalahu dhi'bu wa nahnu usba, we are a band, unbroken. A wolf will get him? Please. Wasn't that their pride back then? And now that same prideful group has come in front of him, and they're saying, harm has touched us. We've been beat down by the circumstances. We've been humbled. We've been broken. We have nothing left. Here's the stuff from around our house, bida'at, pathetic things we know. And could you please just be generous and give us a full load? And and you haven't answered if you will or not, but even if you do, please, can you give us some more extra charity? Now they're begging for charity. Isn't that the most humbling place a human being can be? For anybody who's worked with their own hands and earned and provided for their own family, to be in a position where you have to beg for food is the most degrading, humiliating position you can be in. Even for someone to borrow money sometimes feels like death if they have integrity. Once people lose that self-respect, then can I borrow $20, bro? Is no problem. But for some people, borrowing money feels like suffocating. Like I'd rather be hungry than borrow. And may Allah not put any of you in that position. And for those of you who are in that position, understand that Allah Azza wa Jalla describes people that are in debt with the words وَفِي الرِّقَابِ, those who are in with a chain around their neck. Because borrowing feels like a chokehold when you're doing it, and feels like a chokehold constantly because it's looming over you, like tugging at your neck. You're not free. As one of the people that we have to help is people that are fil riqab. So now he sees himself in a position to give. Yusuf alayhi salam. He's in more position to give than anyone else, and he's Al-Aziz. And these brothers of his that in the last conversation called him a thief are now calling him Al-Aziz. In the last conversation, they dismissed him and dismissed his family, and now talking about how family has hurt them. And he realizes it's not just them, it's their wives and kids that are hurting too. And even if they've done me a lot of wrong, they don't deserve that. They don't deserve any of that. So Yusuf alayhi salam now sees that there's no reason to keep the secret a secret anymore. It's time to let them know what's up. It's time to confront them. And I told you before, he was hoping for signs of humility, right? And there's two readings. One reading is every action he did humbled them little by little by little by little by little until he saw they're humble enough to break that, right? My reading of it is he tried various things to humble them. And even though they were humbling experiences, even this last comment suggests that even though economically they were humbled, conscience-wise, they weren't yet humbled. The wrong did not seem wrong to them. The dismissal of father's instruction didn't seem like a dismissal to them. Ignoring what they did with their brother didn't seem like a big deal to them. So what does Yusuf alayhi salam say in ayah number 89? Today's job is ayah 88 and 89. So this is what the brothers have said now. And Allah rewards those who give charity. Qala, he said, هَلْ عَلِمْتُم مَّا فَعَلْتُم بِيُوسُفَ وَأَخِيهِ. I'll literally translate. Did you know what you did to Yusuf and his brother? إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ, when you were completely out of control, when you had no control over your rage, when you had no control over your jealousy. Jahal in Arabic is to have a lack of control. It's the opposite. They say jahal is the opposite of ilm and hilm, which means it's the opposite of knowledge, ignorance. So when you were acting ignorantly, one meaning. Hilm means forbearance, holding yourself back, having composure. When you people had no composure, you had no control over your negative emotions, and you let them run over you. Aql, they say it's the opposite of aql. Aql means to be able to think after restraining yourself. When you act in a way that has no restraints, you're called a jahil. Whatever impulse comes, you do. Whatever comes in your mouth, you say. Wherever your hands want to go, they go. Wherever your eyes want to go, they go. That's a jahil. He says, did you know what you did to Yusuf and his brother when you were jahil? When you had no control over your impulses? When you acted so outrageously? When you were in that state? Did you know? Now, what does that mean, did you know? First of all, one layer of this is, did you even realize what you were doing? Because when someone is consumed by hate, when someone is consumed by rage, when someone's consumed by jealousy, when someone's consumed by one of those whispers of the devil, then it's like they don't know even if they do know. You could know and not know. You could know Allah. You could know the Day of Judgment. You could know the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You could know the Quran. You could know all of it and step all over their instructions and not even think twice about it, because all of that has been overrun by your jahil. So what we're learning in this statement is something very powerful. Did you actually know what you were doing? Did you know? And this is his ironic way of saying people who act like that do know. It's as if he's saying, didn't you know? Now, can you hear the pain in Yusuf alayhi salam's words when he says this? He's in a position to do so much to them. And there's so much pent up for so many years. And if that wasn't enough, his brother came to him and cried out to him, and he became the comforting arm of his brother. And now they've abandoned his brother too. And it's the amazing quality of Yusuf alayhi salam that when his brother came to him, separate note, but please make note of this. When his brother came to him and said, this is what they've been doing to me, Yusuf alayhi salam didn't say, by the way, oh, you call that trauma? Let me tell you, trauma boy. I was thrown in a well. They made me a slave. I was put in jail. In other words, there was no trauma contest. One comes to you with their pain, you say, oh, you call that pain? Let me tell you pain. Because my pain bigger than your pain. I get, 100 points. You get 45. You know what that means? We want others to know what we feel at the expense of what they feel. I don't want to acknowledge what you feel. But look at Yusuf. He's gone through, you can argue taking a step back, what Yusuf has gone through is way worse than what Binyamin went through with his brothers. Way worse. But when Yusuf spoke out, he didn't just speak out for himself. He says, did you know what you did with Yusuf and his brother? As if your crime is the same, but it's not the same. You didn't try to kill Binyamin. Well, one thing is the same. You abandoned both of us. And do you think after you left me in the dark and did away with me, the abuses you did to Binyamin are any less? You think your sins were over when you were done with me and you were good after that? Because you told yourselves, وَتَكُونُوا مِن بَعْدِهِ قَوْمًا صَالِحِينَ. You told yourselves after you're done with him, you'll be good people. That what you call being good? How you've been with Binyamin? He doesn't just feel his own pain. Whose pain does he feel? Binyamin's. This was the time for his redemption. This was the time for him to say, do you know what you did to me? This was his time. This was his moment. It was about him. No, it wasn't. It was about him and his brother. And this is the heart of Yusuf alayhi salam. This is the genuineness of Yusuf alayhi salam. This is the love of Yusuf alayhi salam. He felt the pain for himself and he felt the pain for his brother. And he put them as one. What you did with Yusuf and his brother. هل علمتم ما فعلتم بيوسف وأخيه إذا أنتم جاهلون. Now the words Yusuf are coming out of his mouth. Wait, we never told you his name's Yusuf. We said he used to have a brother that stole. We didn't even dignify mentioning his name. What? He threw it out, didn't he? He let it be known. And when he said these words, you have to appreciate, in hal alimtum, did you know? It also means, some have interpreted this as, did you remember? Or did you realize? Did you come to terms with the fact? It also suggests, in this immediate case, it even means, here you are asking for help, asking as if harm has touched you, and you have no knowledge of the harm you caused. You have very good awareness that you're in trouble. Those you love are in trouble. But others that you were supposed to love, that you caused harm to, the thought doesn't even occur to you. Did you not know? And the fa'altum could be istimrari, could mean what you did and what you had been doing. What you did to Yusuf and what you continue to do with his brother. إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ. When you were jahil. Now some have tried to give the brothers benefit of the doubt. That's a valid interpretation. I don't say that it's incorrect. I'm just not as convinced of it. And that interpretation is إِذْ أَنْتُمْ جَاهِلُونَ is dharfiyya, suggesting you used to be bad. Do you know what you did with Yusuf and his brother when you used to be bad? Because I see you're good now. So you're not as bad anymore. But so it's kind of exonerating them, because you have to understand, in classical tafsir, there was an opinion, again, without solid basis, an opinion floated that all of the brothers are prophets. That's an opinion floated. The problem is no prophet's ever described like this, ever. And because the opinion now is that they are prophets, then all of the interpretations were trying to put a positive spin on everything in the surah that comes up about them to convince the audience that they're not that bad, because after all, they're prophets. And we don't want people to think that prophets are bad. You understand? So once you hold on to an opinion, it starts casting a shade on all the interpretation you have. My problem with that is the text should cast shade on all opinion. And if I have an opinion, it should be in light of the text. But the what I see, Allahu A'lam, is not that makes less sense. Even if I were to try to agree with it, it makes less sense. Why? Because it's not becoming of Yusuf alayhi salam. If he sees that they are reformed and they've changed, then it's not the time to bring up, I see that you've changed, but do you know that you were really bad? That doesn't seem becoming of a prophet. To bring up past mistakes if you see that somebody has been reformed. However, when someone hasn't been reformed, when someone's still up to no good and oblivious about what they've done, then maybe they need to get called out. And that seems very much in line with prophetic teaching, which is why I don't believe that they were prophets. And I also believe that they're not on their way to reform yet. They've been humbled by circumstance, but there's a difference between humbled economically, humbled socially, but humbling the heart to your own sins hasn't happened yet. You see, this is an important distinction because somebody could live a humble lifestyle. They could have no means. They could live in a meager apartment, dirty old clothes, but still have the arrogance of the Pharaoh. Pride and arrogance doesn't have to do with the things you possess. You could be a billionaire and humble, and I've met people like that. And you could have almost nothing that you should ever be proud of, and you're the most arrogant human being walking around. That could be the case. So, and here's what we're learning. They have been humbled by circumstance, but that doesn't mean the character has been humbled. But now that he sees that they're broken, their pride is broken at least, because now they're coming and begging for charity. Now it's time to let them know. Did you know what you did with Yusuf and his brother? If antum jahil, and he didn't say, did you know what you did to your two brothers? Because the expression should be akhawaykum. Do you know what you did to your two brothers? He didn't say that. And then he said Yusuf, and he didn't mention Binyamin by name. He mentioned himself by name, but didn't mention Binyamin by name. He said Yusuf and his brother. Why not mention his name? Because you never thought of him by name. You hurt him because he was my brother. You hated him because of his association to me. That's why you did what you did to him. That's what akhihi gives you. Yusuf and his brother, because every time you saw him, you saw a reflection of me, so you abused him. That's what you did, isn't it? So now they're in this completely humbled state, and these words have come like an avalanche and hit them. And Yusuf alayhi salam, one can only imagine the tears he must have had to hold back to say what he said. Sometimes, even if you're in a position of power, when you have to confront the one that abused you, even though they're no position to abuse you anymore. There are some people that were abused as children, and the people who abused them were in the family. And they're much older now. The guy has had 2 heart attacks and surgeries, and he's on a cane and he can barely stand up. And you're completely adult and strong and capable and independent. They can't even stand up so much as harm you. But you remember what they did when you were a child. And when you're standing in front of them, you start shaking. Because you confronted them. You're just, I know what you did. Do you know what you did? And even though you feel like you have the strength to confront them now, part of you is still rattled by what they did. That's what he's experiencing. And that's because, these conversations happen in the abused's mind all the time. Do you know what you did to me? Do you know how much that hurt me? Do you realize this is what you did? Do you have does it ever bother your conscience? People that have been hurt, they are abused like that, oppressed like that, they have these imaginary conversations with their oppressor. I just want to know what you have to say. And for some people, they run back to their abuser to see if they'll get a reasonable response. And they go back and they try to get a reasonable response, only to end up getting abused again. Only to end up making things worse for themselves. That's what happens. But now they are not in a position to answer back, are they? They're that position that they used to be in, where they used to say, "Inna bana la fi dhalalin mubin." Dad is so lost. Dad is confused. When father would mention Yusuf's name, they'd get angry. Remember that not too long ago? They get mad by the mention of his name. And now you just called him Ayyuhal Aziz, mighty minister, the authority, the respectable authority minister. We've been hit by harm and our families. Give us full measure. Meaning deal with us right. Did you deal with Yusuf right? We brought pathetic goods. You brought these goods. Like one time you treated Yusuf as nothing but useless goods. Get rid of him. Tasaddaq alayna, give us charity. Is this the sadaqah you've been giving me, your brother, and your dad? Inna Allah yajzil mutasaddiqeen. Certainly Allah gives those, Allah compensates those who give charity. That's a really good lecture. Allah gives those who give charity. How come you don't hear that for yourself? Why couldn't you be charitable with even a smile? Why couldn't you be charitable with respect to your father? Charity is not just about money. You can give sadaqah, al-basmatu fi wajhi akhika sadaqah. Smiling in the face of your brother is sadaqah. You couldn't give that to Binyamin? You couldn't give that to Yusuf? Or was that sadaqah? It didn't cost you much. But ironically, in Allah yajzil mutasaddiqeen, what do you find? That people that are oppressive like that can also quote God. They can also quote the sacred word. They can also talk about rewards. Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you so much. May Allah reward you. Yes. Yes. Allah does reward. But that doesn't take away. I mean, I'm glad you have faith in Allah. It's really good. But you need to come to terms with what you did. I need to hear from yourself. What do you have to say for yourselves? What do you have to say for yourselves? This confrontation has now taken place. The earth from beneath their feet has been pulled out. As if they weren't broken by circumstance already. Everything their dad's been telling them is probably flashing in front of their eyes, ringing their ears. What do we do now? And in the next ayah, they're going to take a good look at Yusuf's face. And then they're going to say, I'll tell you tomorrow. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Gotcha there, huh?